Incredible violence and disruption in Cape Town over the last few days and through the day today as a result of that taxi strike, a response to how the city of Cape Town has been impounding vehicles when their drivers break the law. A huge debate breaking out around whether taxi drivers should be allowed to continue as they have been, whether they're breaking the law or not, or whether the city of Cape Town is trying to crack down too hard on taxi owners and drivers. In the middle of this is the urban geography of Cape Town itself. It's probably the most congested city in our country at certain times. Jodi Allemeier is an independent consultant in municipal governance and urban development, also founder of the Urban Jodi. Jodi, good afternoon to you. Firstly, would it be true to say that the way Cape Town is set up, the apartheid geography, richer suburbs and working areas, poorer townships, is that a big part of the transport problems we see in the city now?
Hi, Stephen. Yes, I think so. And firstly, to say if we discuss this, it doesn't mean that we are absolving people of their personal responsibility or individual responsibility, especially for acts of violence. We can, condemn those and hold people personally responsible for that, while also seeking to understand the structural issues at play. The spatial form of our city requires that any transport provider, whether public or private, has to travel very long distances at peak hours only. So you've got a limited moment of time in the morning and the evening where you've got to travel quite a long distance, and you've got a market of people who have very little money in their pockets to pay for that transport. So just the demand economics of the system is very poor from a transport economics perspective because of the spatial form of our city and because of the economic disparities between low income and wealthier income people in our city. Any public transport system in the world would be based on a balance of affordability to the commuter, a level of service, so how frequently is it going to run, how far geographically is it going to reach, and what quality, how safe and what is the experience of the commuter, and whether or not it is subsidized. So if you are expecting it to have a high level of service and affordable to the commuter, it is usually subsidized. Minibus taxis are not subsidized. They're not actually public transport. They're a privately operated form of high passenger transport. But they are affordable to the commuter, and they have a relatively high level of service in terms of reach and frequency in that peak period. So this does influence other incentives and structure in their industry, where sort of something has to give. Drivers have to race up and down the road to get as many bodies into their taxi as they can to earn their take at the end of the day. All of these things sort of influence at the end of the day the sort of structure of that industry and the behavior on the road, the stress and the trauma of having to interact in that sort of demand economy in the mornings.
One of the taxi industry, we all know this, the minibus taxi industry has immense power. Whenever someone announces a general strike or a national shutdown, the first question is, will the taxis be working on that day or not? And we all know that shutdown will only work if the taxis don't work. And that's just one demonstration of their power. Is that power a failure of other public transport systems?
Yeah, I think it's many things, because there is now an intersection, obviously, between their power to actually move many people at once, as well as their use of violence. So, those two things go hand in hand. Just holding out on the service that they provide of moving many people is one thing and has a huge economic impact, but the use of violence is another that is hugely destabilizing and threatening many people. And the source of tension in society is also shifting, where the tension might initially be between law enforcement and what they perceive and many perceive to be lawlessness, just in terms of obeying traffic rules, or between private car owners who get frustrated with the taxi and the taxi, that sort of thing. But now the tension is very much between people who are being made to feel unsafe in their communities, people who are being made to feel unsafe attempting to go to work or attempting to help somebody go to work. So the power, I think, we can speak about it in many different ways, where it is partly about the actual service that they provide, but now it is also about the manner in which they exert their right to continue to do that. Definitely the sort of absence of any other real infrastructure and public transport is a part of it. Obviously, our train infrastructure has been sort of taken a knock, and we're starting to see that return to some improvements in Cape Town. My city is a minor percentage of people's mobility in Cape Town. And then we've got Golden Arrow bus services. So those are the only 3 subsidized forms of public transport. Minibus taxis themselves have very little by way of infrastructure. There's 11 kilometers of dedicated lanes which they share with buses on the freeway out of thousands of kilometers of roads that they use. So there's very little by way of sort of dedicated infrastructure to support what would typically be seen as a formalized mass transport system. So without that sort of dedicated infrastructure, dedicated support, the last major sort of regularization process we saw was the taxi recapitalization program, which is quite a long time ago now. It's very difficult to sort of say we've got any real levers to balance that power. The levers sit at a national level when it comes to subsidy and regularization, and some sit at a local level when it comes to provision of that infrastructure or reorganizing the spatial form to change the demand patterns and make it a slightly more viable or prosperous business.
So if the other public transport systems you spoke about, a railway taking a bit of a knock, sort of disappearing in front of our eyes in some cases, the fact that those transport systems are failing, is that the fault of those in charge of the city? Maybe over a very long time, but is that the fault of those in charge? They had the agency to do something about it.
I mean, I think that's quite a complicated question, and that's definitely a collective responsibility. The way transport is governed in our countries, we've got different agencies between national, provincial and local with different levels of authority, and that's part of the problem, is that it's very easy for responsibility to sort of slip between the cracks between those. And then obviously in South Africa we've got real dysfunction in terms of governance and in terms of crime and safety. So the falling back of rail infrastructure wasn't merely a matter of poor operations, it was also a matter of infrastructure being destroyed. There's lots of speculation, is that the taxis, was it price, the contractors, who was it who had the most interest in doing that? We still to date do not see any, evidence, anything coming to court around who was actually responsible for the breakdown of that infrastructure. We do see some turnaround and some court cases happening in terms of corruption at PRASA. And those are all an important part of the picture. This is not just an operational failure, but it is a governance failure.
So Cape Town's like other South African cities, right? I mean, poor people have to go very far to work every day. That's how it works. You sketched it out at the very beginning. What kind of transport system should we have? In an ideal world, would we have a lot more rail than we do, particularly because of the long distances? Would we have some sort of point-to-point system? Would we have a single ticket system that you could use on rail and you could use maybe for part of a minibus taxi ride or for some other bus system as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it has to be a mixture of all sorts of different modes. Personally, I would like to see the rail system really get back to its sort of heyday of moving hundreds of thousands a day. I would also like to see some of the new connections that have been spoken about for years being done. The connection, the Blue Downs connection, that would allow people to travel directly from Khayelitsha to Bellville would be an absolute game changer, not just from a transport perspective, but also in terms of opening up land use developments in the Blue Downs and Feleni, Kuils River area. And that, speaks to another point, which is that transport and land use need to go hand in hand. The way in which we plan for an improved mobility system really does rely on our land use patterns. Any mobility system will be operating at a loss in our current in our current land use patterns, with lots of people living on one part of the city and working in another part of the city. And any sort of shift to one entity, such as the city of Cape Town, having the responsibility to manage and subsidize transport, would provide for quite a strong financial incentive for them to also fix the land use, because then you start to see a real sort of need from an operational perspective to work with the demand dynamics. At the same time, I think we will always probably have some role for a minibus taxi service. They do have by far the biggest reach and offering in terms of their level of service in that regard, to be able to go into lots of different spaces of our city at a high frequency. So I think we do need to recognize that we have to come around the table with what is the role of the minibus taxi in our transport system going forward. The idea that we will replace it with something else, I think, is not a viable option. So it really is around what is the incentives in terms of infrastructure provision, in terms of subsidy, in terms of formalization. What is that will actually bring those who are open to reform, because they are amongst the taxi businesses who are open to reform, to come into some sort of system. And then, of course, there are other forms of mobility. Many people still walk to school, to places of work, or they walk a part of their travel distance. They might take a bus halfway and then walk the last stretch. So making the improvements to the public realm that make that form of mobility at least more dignified, more comfortable, more safe, from a human safety perspective, from a perspective of safety from crime, safety from road accidents, that should really be a big part of our investment.
Jodi, I found over the years, if you watch arguments in our country around land, they get very heated and for very understandable reasons. But transport can be the same. Everyone has a strong view, and sometimes they all have strong arguments. You want people who just want to build as many roads as we can so everyone can use their own car. You've got those who want everyone to move everywhere on two wheels. They just want to cycle everywhere. You've got the railway lobby, who have a strong argument as well, because it moves a lot of people very quickly. On the other hand, you use a lot of land for that. Why is it so difficult on issues of transport to get everyone to agree?
Part of it, I think, is that we don't actually have commuters around the table. There's a real absence of a commuter voice in this. So it's all people who have got either our pet projects and pet interests and kind of I have a dream moments, or vested interests in the particular mode of transport and delivery solution. We've got something to gain out of it being done, or just quite a limited point of view. I mean, as much as right now is a crisis, and I'm sitting here very nervous about things that are happening even just in my own community, it has brought out a sort of extreme moment of so many different points of view around what is the root cause, who is right, who is wrong, all of these sorts of things. So there are so many different points of view, but we really need to make sure that the commuter voice is central to this. And I think if we do that, we will hear commuters who are saying, no single one of these is right. I'm using all modes of transport. And so you have to design for that. You have to design the city for all modes of transport, because that is the real commuter experience. And the commuter wants affordability, safety, and reliability.
Jodi Allemeier, thank you. Independent consultant in municipal governance and urban development. I really do appreciate the time.